All right, how's it going, y'all? So today we're back in Synology, and we're going to be talking about the biggest mistakes users make when they're using Synology Drive. Synology Drive is a phenomenal application. It allows you to synchronize across multiple NASs with Synology Drive Sync. It also allows you to do an on-demand sync or a full sync to computers. That way you don't have to have a SMB connection to the NAS, and instead you can sync down files. This is a huge performance boost for remote editors and people working remotely, but it also does come with some very specific things you need to understand. It also has a phenomenal interface that allows you to share out files with clients and things like that. It really is targeted at replacing Google Drive. And while it cannot do everything that Google Drive can, it is by far the closest option out there. But it's one of those things where you can have massive performance issues and just bad setup configurations that really mess you up. So we're going to go through those most common mistakes that users are using whenever I'm doing consulting. By the way, there's a link down in the description below if you want to hire me. But when I'm doing consulting, these are the things I check and make sure, and these are by far the biggest mistakes I see to the entire workflow. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, our web developer, Visaggio Co. If you remember about a year ago, SpaceRex went through a massive rebrand. We got new logos, new website, and we spun off the Yarbrough Technologies as the consulting arm. This was all done through Matt and his team. We met with them often to go over what we thought would be best, and they really helped us build an entire business plan and really think through the pros and cons to every single one of our decisions, all while also building us out logos, new colors, new fonts, and an entire website. I cannot recommend them enough, and I think their work absolutely speaks for itself. So if you're ready to take your business to the next level, check out Visaggio Co. in the link in the description. They have web development packages starting from just getting started all the way up into high-end projects, marketing, and entire rebranding. So check out Visaggio Co. in the link in the description, and thanks for sponsoring today's video. All right, so I'm assuming you already have a fundamental understanding of how Synology Drive works, and you've got it installed for this. And by far the most common mistake I see people make, and this is the thing that will kill your performance, especially if you're a video editor or photographer, anybody with over 150 to 200,000 files in a folder, is under team folders, is this number of versions right here. This right here causes massive, massive, massive performance issues, and people never know. It's also the versions that nobody ever actually uses. I live in these worlds. I do this all the time. I've never once restored a file from Synology Drive versions. What these versions are very similar to your Google Drive versions. It goes through and it tracks every single save to every single file, which is great. However, if you're somebody like a video editor, a photographer, or just people with massive, massive, massive numbers of files, these versions eat your performance. Even in instances where I do use them for office deployments, because we're just talking about office files. So there's maybe 20,000 files in there. I really recommend having IntelliVersioning on so you don't have them go forever. And really, you probably do not want to have these versions at all if you can help it. Let's talk about why. Why are these versions so bad when I spend my entire life talking about how phenomenal snapshots are, and really, they're both just versions, right? So with snapshots, it is essentially pulling a snapshot of the entire file system in that exact point in time. It doesn't care how many files there are in there, because it's not actually snapshotting the files. It's actually going a step below. It is snapshotting the underlying file system, the kind of BTRFS volume that's created. It is actually snapshotting that. So because of that, it does not matter how many files you've got, because snapshots are the exact same thing. You can have 2 files or 2 million files. A snapshot is going to operate identically. However, Synology Drive versions are different. Synology Drive versions are not time-based. They are save and event-based per file. They actually still use BTRFS snapshots under the hood. However, Synology Drive tracks every single change to every single file. That means if you've got 2 million files and 8 versions, you can end up with a database that has 16 million rows in it, all containing different versions of the file and the snapshot they go back to. They eat space and they eat performance. So if you are somebody who is using those Office file servers, you can use the versions here, but make sure not to go too many versions and make sure you have rotate versions regularly on. For me, the times I do use Synology Drive versions are for people who are really just needing to be able to self-restore files, and that is where this can be useful. But any share that you're having a massive number of files in and want the utmost performance out of, when you enable it, always disable these versioning. If you have enabled versioning and you need to get that performance back, it will take a while. I've had this take 72 hours to clean out versions, but afterwards, the NAS was 3 or 4 times faster at Synology Drive tasks because of how much performance these Synology Drive versions were taking up. So if you were in that case where you had like 8 versions here and it had been going for months and months and months and you need to get your performance back, what you do is you first disable the versions just like I did there, and then we come into settings and hit this empty recycling bins, empty now. This doesn't just empty the recycling bins. It also clears off old versions. And so this task can take days to run if you had a massive file system for years that was having Synology Drive versions enabled. Furthermore, there is an odd setup here for its own recycling bin. And I will be honest, I do not know why Synology Drive has its own recycling bin, but you also want to have this set to empty regularly. So I would also recommend having a recycling bin task empty after 7 days there as well. So that way it gets run on a regular basis, even if you do have the recycling bin in for Synology Drive. There's not very good documentation on this at all, which sucks. You can also see right here the versions will tell you roughly how much space is taking up. I'll be honest with you, this can often be a complete lie. I've seen the file versions space taken up by Synology Drive to be greater than the total space in it. This number is not too useful, but it will show you big numbers sometimes, and that can help tee you off to, oh, maybe there is something going on there. But that is where it will just eat your performance. So that was by far the biggest mistake. Mistake number 1. Check that out because you could be having horrible performance if you're running that. And if you do disable those things, make sure to hit this empty button and it will clear off that stuff, though it will take a while. Also, snapshots do not have this problem. Snapshots you can take every 5 minutes and you're not going to get those performance issues. And so really, this is what I use for versioning for everyone. Snapshots are far superior. The only downside is the restorability directly through Synology Drive. All right, so that was number 1 and by far the longest winded. The next is a really funny one that I see quite often, and that is under Synology Drive Share Sync. So I've got some tutorials in Synology Drive Share Sync, and what Synology Drive Share Sync does is it syncs 2 NASs together. It is great. It allows you to have identical files on both systems, and so if you've got 2 offices, you can use this to have local access at either location, and it works really well. It doesn't scale super well for those people who have multiple millions of files, but for people below that, it works really, really well. However, the single most common mistake I see people make with that configuration is that they set up Synology Drive Share Sync on both NASs. So NAS A is syncing to NAS B, and then NAS B also has a task to sync with NAS A, and they form a loop. Essentially, whenever you're setting up Synology Drive Share Sync, you only install Share Sync on one NAS, not 2 of them, only one of them. You take the one that is going to be considered the client. The client reaches out to the server, and the client is what has Synology Drive Share Sync running. And it is in charge of requesting those files and doing that. Then the server communicates with that. You don't need to have the sync task on both systems. If you do that, weird things start to happen. You end up with these looping conflict files sometimes. I really wish Synology would have a detection for that. It would not be that hard, but I see it fairly often, and it kind of works fine enough, but then all of a sudden weird things just start happening, and that is why. So if you are using Synology Drive Share Sync, make sure it's only installed on one system and that is it. And generally, it should be the one that is going to the remote location, and it will connect back to the main server. I do wish the main server that's actually running the Synology Drive server would actually have all of that info in there and be able to tell the sync status a little bit better. Also, if you are using Synology Drive Share Sync, you do not need to enable team folders. You only need to do it on the one system that is the server. All right, so that was number 2. If you are using Synology Drive Share Sync, make sure it's only set up to sync on one of the NASs. If you have 4 NASs you want in sync, you will have 3 of the NASs all syncing to the 4th NAS. So you would still have 3 Synology Drive Share Syncs going, all to one NAS, but just make sure that the same NAS is not syncing the same folders twice. All right, so now on to number 3, and this is one that's a very easy mistake to make, and you probably know if you've done it already, and that is having on-demand sync not set up when you're expecting it. So Synology Drive has a phenomenal Synology Drive client. Right here, it has a great way of having a synchronization task, so you can access all the files on your NAS wherever you are, and it works just like iCloud Drive, Google Drive, OneDrive, all of those features that allow you to have a cloud sync. And for the longest time, this was not available on macOS. On Windows, this is not nearly as much of an issue because it's trivial to toggle back and forth. On macOS, the most common issue I see that people fill up their space with is when they're hooking up a connection. Let's just do my drive. They don't tick this Enable On-Demand Sync button. If you do not tick that Enable On-Demand Sync button, it is going to download every single file to your hard drive and keep those in sync. That means it is going to take up a ton of space and you're going to lose the benefit of having a NAS. Now, for certain workflows, this is great. And people love it for depending on what they're doing. Sometimes you've got a remote video editor who's using this to sync and they need access to all the files all the time. If you know what you're doing and you've got it set up well, having the full sync is great. But most people do not want the full sync. They instead want the on-demand sync. And with macOS, you have to choose it at time of creation. With Windows, you can toggle back and forth anytime you want to. But with Mac, because this actually uses the macOS iCloud API in the backend that Finder created, you have to do it at time of creation because it fundamentally stores them separately. Unfortunately, with macOS, you also cannot choose where to store this. It has to be on the internal drive because it is using that iCloud protocol. So if you're using the on-demand sync, the cloud sync, it has to be on macOS's internal drive that it syncs to. You can't have it on an external drive. But if you do a full sync, you can choose where. But right there, make sure to check that because otherwise it is going to download every single file that is in that folder to your computer's hard drive and fill it up. Really, really, really common issue I see. Also, when you go ahead and realize this and you undo it, make sure to delete the sync job and remember to delete the synced folder because it will still have all that data in there and it will still be taking up space on your hard drive. Deleting the task does not delete the local folder. All right, so that was number 3. I see it really often and you have to catch it right when you create it. Otherwise, you will have massive issues as we just saw there. Number 4 is the performance killer, and it's really hard to understand for people. Number 4 is having the Quick Connect relay server in play when you're using Synology Drive syncing. And this is true for both Synology Drive client on a computer or Synology Drive Share Sync on a NAS. Quick Connect is great for a lot of people. It makes things very easy to just auto-detect the fastest way to connect, and without any port forwarding or anything like that, it will always get you a connection. However, if you are using the relay server, which is what Quick Connect will default to if no other options are available, your performance will be abysmal. We're talking about 500 kilobytes per second, which is really, really, really slow. And that is because Synology maintains those relay servers and it costs them money, so they throttle it down. It can actually be useful for very simple home users who, if you're just downloading a couple Word documents, you might not even notice, and sometimes you get that hole punching. But you will find for a lot of time, your remote people are having next to zero performance. And you'll think there's something wrong. You'll think that it's actually broken, when in reality, it's just insanely slow. So, if you want to get a direct connection, there's a few ways of doing it depending on your security requirements and your know-how. If you use Quick Connect, anybody in the local network will get that direct connection. Quick Connect makes sure of it, has a lot of great things there. But if you're using Quick Connect and you're not over a VPN server and you want remote clients to be able to sync at full speed and you don't want to have any technical overhead on these things, what you need to do is you need to go in and you need to forward port 6690 TCP from your router to the NAS, and it will then be able to negotiate that direct connection. Unfortunately, the Synology Drive client for computers does not tell you if it's going to be a direct connection or not, and so you kind of have to see from the speeds. I really wish it would tell you if it was using a relay server or not. The Synology Drive Share Sync uses the exact same port, and it will actually tell you if it's using Quick Connect, if it's a direct connection, or over the internet. And so that is issue number 4. That is just a performance killer. If you're somebody who does not have the ability to do any kind of port forwarding because you're on Starlink or some other thing that does not give you a public IP address, or you want it for security and you just don't want anything exposed to the internet only through VPNs, you either set up a local VPN server or set up Tailscale, which will work beautifully for that. And I've got guides on all those things, and I do it for clients all the time. So that is number 4, is essentially using the Quick Connect relay server and trying to sync large files. You can still use Quick Connect. However, if you have port 6690 TCP open, then it will still use Quick Connect, but it will not use a Quick Connect relay server, rather a Quick Connect direct connection. If you're not super familiar with networking, it can be a little complex to understand, but the speeds are a drastic shift because it is so much faster with that direct connection. The same thing is also true for sharing out files. If you create a share link and somebody's outside the local network, they are also going to be limited to those really slow throughputs from the Synology Drive share button as well. So if I had Quick Connect enabled, this would default to a Quick Connect link, which would be fast inside the network, but really slow outside the network. And so that's where you can create like a custom domain. There's a lot of options there, but those are the reasons why you're having horrible performance woes if you are not having any kind of port forwarding done and you're sharing stuff out of your NAS, because it has to go through a relay server if the computer that you're sharing the file with cannot negotiate a direct connection to your NAS. All right, so now on to number 5, and it's all about SSL security certificates, because this is one thing that can drive you crazy, as anybody who's dealt with these things probably has seen. So if you're in an environment where you are not using Quick Connect to connect to everything, instead you're using like an IP address or a DNS address that is only accessible on a local network, you can run into some very annoying certificate errors because essentially you probably do not have a signed certificate for wherever you're going to. Let's say you're using Tailscale and you're not using the Tailscale certificates. I actually have trouble with the Tailscale certificates, so I don't recommend using them. And so essentially you find yourself where every year, all of a sudden, all of your clients just disconnect and you have to re-authenticate them. Or there's also another case where you've got it set on a specific certificate, maybe your Synology.me DDNS, and it is renewing every 60 days, and now all of your clients are disconnecting, and you're having to go through that process of hitting, oh yes, I trust this client, and re-signing in on each of those. That is where understanding the SSL certificates is really important. What I recommend doing for people who are in those cases where it's only going to be accessible on a local network or a VPN server, we want to come into our security certificate and we want to set this certificate to something that's not going to expire often. Active Backup for Business now comes with a 10-year certificate. So one thing I'll actually do, even if we're not going to use Active Backup for Business, I would come in here and I would just hit install on Active Backup for Business. And now it automatically creates a certificate for that is signed for 10 years. Synology, if you're watching this, please just give us an option to create a 10-year certificate right within the menu. It'd be very useful for times where you want encryption because you don't want stuff firing over plain text, But you also are only going to have this thing on a local network, so you're not really that worried about a man-in-the-middle attack, but you still want that encryption, right? So what you do is you install Active Backup for Business, come into Settings, for Synology Drive Server, you set it to that certificate. When you do this, all of your clients are going to not trust it anymore, but that'll be the last time for 10 years in this case. Synology comes with a default 1-year certificate, which is fine for most people, but what'll happen is when this renews automatically, it's not signed properly for where they're going because it's just a self-signed certificate, so it loses trust. If you are using Quick Connect or a DDNS, you can actually have it where it'll renew automatically every 60 days, and it'll be automatically trusted because you're actually going to that address. But for everyone else, if you're not using Quick Connect and you're not super familiar with certificates, the easiest thing to do is to just have everybody trust it once. Go in, set it to the Active Backup for Business certificate you got when you added in Active Backup for Business, and be done with it. You'll have to deal with this once every 10 years, which is not that big of a deal. And basically, when clients connect for the very first time, you'll say, hey, I don't trust this connection, do you? And you can say yes, and now it will be trusted for the next 10 years until that certificate expires, and it'll just make your life a lot easier. All right, well, that was the last one. If you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. If you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. And have a good one. Bye.